Hi, welcome to HowtoDandD. Another live stream. We're going to cover Dungeon Master sort of guide. I've been doing a lot of these videos called the Lazy Dungeon Master, you might say. Strategies for sort of speeding up things, making things a lot easier for you as a Dungeon Master to run the game. And fortunately, it's one of those videos that players and Dungeon Masters can watch because hopefully it will help move people along. You'll find the start time for this video down in the description, so I will put the start time down there. How's it going, Captain Cool Cat? Big Kids here. Got Daniel here. How's it going? And Kanoko's here. I know I pronounce your name awful, but it is what it is. Okay, now you'll find most of my live streams are usually unlisted. So my live streams go unlisted, which means you don't necessarily get access to them unless you have your subscribed, hit the bell button, and notifications on. So you've got to do 3 different things to be able to get access to the live streams because they do go unlisted. So that's subscribed, hit the bell button, and notifications turned on. Okay. I will put an edited version out later on for those of you who want to watch this and can't hang around for the full live stream, but it will not include the Q&A or questions and answers at the end of the live stream. My patrons get access to the full live stream, so they don't have to worry about that sort of stuff. So I always give them access to the whole thing. Now, if you haven't been part of my live streams before, what I normally do is I present everything first, and then I open up for questions and answers and feedback and a discussion with people. I don't believe this video will be particularly long. I would say 10, 15, probably more on the 15-minute range in terms of how much time it will take to discuss everything. You will see my face at the end. I'm going to use a lot of slides and pictures. It just makes life a little bit easier for me in terms of presenting everything. Okay, so grab a drink, settle back, and yes, you will see my face at the end of this thing, but I will be using a lot of slides for today. Okay. Hi, welcome to HowtoDandD. My name is Fred Wheeler, and today I want to talk about Dungeons & Dragons 5e, and the topic for today is Dungeon Masters not using initiative is lazy. Particularly in Dungeons & Dragons 5e. All of my references will be back to the current version of Dungeons & Dragons. So why is it lazy? Let's break this down and I'll have a good hard look at it. Why do Dungeon Masters tolerate the current initiative system for Dungeons & Dragons 5e combat? Why do people tolerate it? I wonder why I tolerate it. There's a lot of things that are good and bad about it. Is it just that it is the system that people traditionally have used for so long and we just can't let go of it and it just permeates the game and stays there and we're sort of, this is what we're used to, so we're going to keep doing the same thing we've always done before. Maybe that's what's going on. And then the argument is we need an order of turns to manage combat. You can't just, if you don't have a turn order in a system like this, you've got a whole bunch of people trying to do everything at the same time, it's impossible to manage. So we've got to have a turn system. So hence initiative makes it possible to create that system. Well, okay, fine. Dungeon Masters like asking that please roll initiative. Do Dungeon Masters actually like asking that question? I know I don't necessarily find myself enjoying that process at all because I know what's coming next. And then you've got to go through the process of players looking at initiative modifiers if they've forgotten what they are, rolling a 20-sided dice or picking up the 20-sided dice. You wait for them as they add numbers up. Is this really fun? Is this really the aspect of combat and Dungeons & Dragons we were so excited to play? I really don't believe that it is. Then the argument goes that there's no better way to manage Dungeons & Dragons 5e combat, that nobody's come up with something that's better. So therefore, this is what we're using. And, that grates on me an awful lot. The fact is that initiative slows down combat. The very inception of your combat and something happens that triggers a battle, and the first thing we do is we have to go through the number crunching and the dice rolling process, and there's an awful lot of waiting going on because we're not just waiting for one person to make a dice roll, we're waiting for the entire table to make dice rolls, and then you've got to put it all into order. I just don't get it. And a lot of people have commented on alternatives to initiative. I've even done a video on a variant initiative called group initiative. Those with high initiative modifiers don't necessarily get to go before other characters with a low dexterity or a low initiative modifier. So it doesn't even follow that because of the variation of a 20-sided dice, you can get a 1, you can get a 20, and your modifier added to that. I mean, of course, on average, as a general rule, somebody with a higher initiative modifier is going to get to go first over somebody who's got a low initiative modifier. Over time, that'll play out. Absolutely, I agree. But it doesn't guarantee that somebody with a high initiative modifier or who has a quick, fast character would actually do that. And then there's the argument about dexterity. Does dexterity actually have anything to do with your ability to respond at the inception or at the beginning of a battle? And the argument seems to be, to me, that no, not necessarily. I've had plenty of experience in martial arts, and dexterity is not the only thing that's really important. There's a lot of other things going on. In fact, it would make much more sense to me to use wisdom over dexterity. But that's beside the point. Because of the variation on a 20-sided dice, you're not even necessarily going to wind up with a character who has a high initiative being able to go first, or over somebody with a low initiative. That's the fact. A dungeon master not using traditional initiative systems is lazy. Yeah, absolutely. There are other systems in place that certainly are a bit quicker and involve removing a lot of the other barriers and the mathematics to it. But it's not just lazy, it's actually smart. It's somebody who's actually managed to finally give up the horse. When a dead horse needs to die, I've been for years trying to figure out how to get my players to ditch initiative. And it's been a struggle. And as slowly but surely I will find a way to finally release myself from this dead horse that's been dangling around my neck as a dungeon master for years. And what I've found, not just based on my own personal experience, but the experience of other dungeon masters, and they've talked to me about different ways of doing initiative and what they've tried and what worked for them and their feedback. And as far as I can tell, there are a lot of benefits to ditching the old system of initiative completely. There are lots of ways to manage combat without initiative. And I want to just spell out some of the things that I've come across over the years, and you'll obviously have an opportunity to sort of process that. 1, just go around the table, whether it be clockwise or anti-clockwise, and everybody just takes their turn that way. So you just eliminated the requirement to roll dice and adding up maths, and just sped everything up, made it a lot more simple. So why not go with that? Absolutely, let's do something like that. That makes so much more sense to me. And then, of course, the question is, oh yeah, but Fred, what about when do you go clockwise and when do you go anti-clockwise? Are we always going to be going clockwise? So the person on one side of the dungeon master, I'm assuming you were going to start with the person who's the dungeon master and would go that way. Is that how it's going to work? Or are we going to start with the dungeon master? Where do we start? I would just say, look, have the dungeon master roll a d6 if you're really concerned about which direction you should be going. Roll a 6-sided dice, have the dungeon master do that, select the direction using that. So 1 to 3, you go clockwise, 4 to 6, you go anti-clockwise if you really need to worry about that sort of thing. Personally, I think it would be perfectly fine to decide, well, okay, well, the first combat we have, we're going to go clockwise, the next combat, we're going to go anti-clockwise. So we're going to rotate and change the direction every single time. Would that hurt the game? I don't know that it really would. I think it would actually just mean it would change things up each time, make it a little bit different. Put everyone's initiative modifier in order. And it's one way you can just eliminate the dice roll. Just place everybody's initiative modifier in order on your Dungeon Master screen. No dice rolling, and that order stays the same the whole time. And if there's a tie that needs to be broken with a player, let the players figure that out between them, between their characters. They can just sort of like, okay, well, we're both on the same initiative modifier. We won't roll the dice to determine. We'll just decide who's going to go It's already baked in, that whole concept into Dungeons and Dragons 5e. Oh, what about the Dungeon Master? Well, the Dungeon Master gets to choose. And I would say Dungeon Master, just take your turn. If you've got a monster with an initiative modifier the same as somebody else who's a player character, then just take your turn. Why not? Because honestly, combat is not very, very long in Dungeons and Dragons 5e. Everything's usually over in 1 to 3 rounds. So let's just streamline it, make it a little bit easier for everybody. And then, of course, if you've got a whole bunch of players who are all going to be taking their turn in a row, well, don't have one person take their turn. If you've got your fighter and your rogue and your wizard all going to be acting sort of sequentially, just say, look, all take your turn at the same time. And I've talked about this before. Managing one person at a time is pretty easy for a dungeon master. 2, a little bit harder. 3, maybe a little bit more skill required. But it can be done. I've seen it done. I'm sure you can manage something like that. I encourage you to consider doing it because it will help move things along and it eliminates a whole lot of headache that you didn't really need to engage in. Okay, so what happens if we do this? Well, now we are eliminating those people who should be acting quickly and therefore, it's just random who essentially, depending on where you're going to position yourself. So now it becomes important about which side you sit with regard to the Dungeon Master. I'm going to make sure I'm sitting right beside the Dungeon Master on the clockwise side or the anti-clockwise side, so I get to go first. And is there going to be a battle for the chair? No, well, let's eliminate that problem completely. If we are really concerned about who goes first in a round and about getting a chance to actually perform an action and have your turn, let's eliminate that problem. And the easiest way to do that is to say, no monsters and no characters, no NPCs, no creatures are going to die or fall unconscious or be dying till everybody takes their turn in that 6-second round. So nobody falls unconscious, nobody dies, everybody gets to take their turn, and at the very end of the round when it's complete, then anybody who is sitting on 0 hit points will die, be unconscious or dying. And that eliminates that problem, solves the issue of who goes first or who goes in the order, and you still get to take your turn. And I think that is the easiest way, and it makes combat swift. It still means that even if you go down, you are going to still get to act in that round because you don't fall unconscious or die till the very end of the round. Aren't we told that everything in combat happens in this round in 6 seconds? It's not like there's a sequence of events. And the problem with Dungeons and Dragons 5e is that there's so much sequencing taking place to help manage the table that eventually what we wind up with is reactions and a whole lot of other things going on. And the who goes first and who goes second becomes highly important, when in fact we can eliminate that by just saying that everything happens at the same time, and by doing it this way everybody gets to have their turn, including the monsters, and we just move on from there. Okay, so here's a problem that will rise. As all of you probably already know, there is a thing called surprise. And surprise basically means that usually in the first round of combat, if you are unaware of your enemy, you are surprised, which means you can't do anything. It's not till the end of your turn, when you've completed your turn, that your reaction becomes available. So the whole system starts to fall apart when we start modifying and changing initiative in the initiative system for Dungeons and Dragons 5e because of surprise. Well, how can we solve this problem? Well, there is an easy way to solve it, and I'll tell you what, some of the silly things that have been incorporated into Dungeons and Dragons that make things hugely more complicated than they really needed to be. Why did we even make that possible? Why did we even include it is possible to take a reaction during a round as long as you've taken your turn and you didn't get to do anything and you were surprised? So surprise in Dungeons and Dragons 5e, is that the problem? Yes. In terms of using initiative in this way, so what do? Get rid of it. Just drop it. Just ditch it. You don't need it. It doesn't need to be there. reactions are still going to be able to be taken in round 2 and 3 with regard to spells and other things that you might be able to do with your character. But if you're surprised, you just don't do anything whatsoever till the round ends. And easy peasy, so simple to run, and you don't have to worry about tracking all of that nonsense. And you've eliminated a rule that just added a level of complexity that really didn't need to be there in the first place. Because remember, everything in a round is supposed to be happening all at the same time, right? Now, I'm hoping you found this video helpful and useful to you, and that maybe it's helped you look at a way of removing initiative, or at least presenting the idea to players. And if you're a player, maybe you'll be more open to the idea of deciding it's all right to change up initiative and do something a little bit different. Let's just ditch it and go with something that's a little less structured in form, and then we can still play our game. We all still get to do our turns. Now look, if you like this sort of thing, I have a playlist called The Lazy Dungeon Master, and there's a whole lot of videos in that playlist that talk about speeding up play, making life easy for you as a dungeon master. Lots and lots of really good advice. Otherwise, I have hundreds of videos for players and dungeon masters, which you're welcome to go and check out. If you want to support the channel so I keep doing video content like this, I have a Patreon page where you can support me there, get access to the unlisted live streams, additional content, and priority on the videos that I make. I also have affiliate links down in the description to the book depository and Amazon. If you buy stuff online, I get a small commission from that. I have a merchandise shelf underneath all of my videos if you wanted to buy some sort of swag from the channel. And make sure to share, like, and subscribe. Hit the bell button to be notified when I go live and when I publish new videos. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s. Okay, I'm not gone. I am just putting my glasses on. I need a drink of water because, oh my gosh, I'm dry. I'm dry today. It's getting warmer and warmer. So back to my face, and let's have a discussion about initiative. And I'll be interested to see what people do with initiative. I know there's a lot of people who've changed things up. I've tried lots and lots of different techniques over the years. Some have been embraced by players. Others have been sort of really have not been appealing to players. They've rebelled and got quite upset because the whole idea of moving away from what they were traditionally used to was just too hard for them to cope with. Okay, so Captain Cool Cat, I already said hi to you. Big Kid's here. Daniel's here. Ganoko's here. Okay, when is it going to start? Well, it's going to start, Captain. It's just, you got to understand, I have it planned, and I usually try to make sure I start right on the dot. Where do I get all the cool art from? Okay, so Daniel, most of my art comes from Google searches, and I pull most of my artwork directly from the Dungeons and Dragons sort of galleries. So Wizards of the Coast has a lot of stuff they put out in terms of artwork, and I get a lot of my artwork from there. I also pull a lot of artwork from Pathfinder because it's an open game license. Essentially, it's just Dungeons and Dragons 3.5 with a few little bits and pieces tinkered with, and so I use a lot of their content in terms of their images, and I also use a lot of the images that come from Wizards of the Coast, Magic the Gathering, and there's a lot of really nice artwork there that I usually populate with my videos. Okay, Dolphus, is that a monk with a swordfish? Do you add dex or or strength, dexterity or strength? Well, it's an improvised attack, so I would say you would go with swinging a swordfish. It's going to be strength. You just use the improvised rules for making attacks. I don't think you would necessarily get proficiency with your attack. Because I mean, unless of course you're taking the tavern brawler feat, and you might be proficient with swinging a swordfish. Ah dear. Twisted Tech Mike, how's it going? Maybe set the order based on which players show up on time. This seems to be an issue at most of my tables. Yeah, it can be. what I like about doing initiative this way, if you pull it in such a way, what happens is you can block players together and say, look, you three take your turn. And that means that if you've got somebody who's slow and isn't really sort of getting on with things because they're still planning and still looking up spells and trying to figure out stuff, or still collecting up dice, then what you can do is you can just say, okay, you three go, and one of those three is bound to be ready to take their turn. They take their turn, the next person pipes up, you do that. I would often have people sort of, I would do this, and then, the whole arrangement is, it's those people who are well organised and are swift and at the table are the ones who are going to get to take their turn first. Does it mean that people won't get to take a turn? No, because as I said, nobody's going to go down until they've taken their turn in the round. It's really, really simple to do. You eliminate a lot of the complexity that was put there before that didn't need to be there. And remember, everything's supposed to be happening at the same time, so we can make that happen. It can be done. And I know there are things called reactions in a round, but the only time that a reaction becomes a problem is if people are using surprise. If surprise is involved in the first combat round, then it becomes problematic. So eliminate the ability to have a reaction during your surprise round in the first round. It's only going to come into play if there's no surprise involved, and it's the second round if there is surprise involved. Simple way to deal with it. It doesn't mean you ditch all reactions. You're still going to be keeping reactions, just removing it from the surprise rules. That's it. Okay, what else have we got here? Joshua, how's it going? How would you even play without initiative? Very easily. I just explained it, Joshua. And trust me, I've talked to many people who've run really big tables where they had like 10, 11 players. I've even had numbers like that. And we literally just went round in a circle, and I would break them up into bunches, and I would do exactly what I just talked about. It actually can be done. Hi, Scott. You just need to give it a go. Like I say, try everything at least twice. And if it doesn't work the second time round, then maybe you need to consider dropping it. But always try everything twice, not just once, but twice. The first time it might not be so easy, but the second time I'm sure it will get easier. Okay, Daniel, can you get all the players to declare what they want to do at the same time? Now here's the problem. Now I like the idea, but here's the problem. Players, unless you give them a time limit, will be trying to figure out who's going to do what based off what somebody else has said. And so that means that you could wind up with the whole table being really quiet, waiting for somebody to say something first. And then, so that slows the whole process down. And now you're probably in a situation where, unless you've got a timer saying you've got 60 seconds or 2 minutes or whatever to make a decision about what everybody's going to do, that's still slowing it down. Okay, you might as well just use initiative. You might as well just use the initiative system. So it require a lot of training and practice by the players to be able to deal with that. Roll a d20 for the action attack, and then the DM narrates what happens, starting with the person with the highest roll. So it's Daniel. It's still moving back to that sort of thing. I have heard of people who do sort of get everybody to declare what they're going to do before they start combat, and then they're locked in and they can't shift from that. But like I say, you're going to wind up with player paralysis as they try to decide what they're going to do based on what somebody else did. Because if you start saying, oh, well, I'm going to heal this character who's down, and then you've got two players who make the same decision. Oh, I want to heal this character who's down. Oh, now we're both healing him, and you're going to wind up with too many hit points, or wind up with more healing than we wanted to do, and I could have done something else. So what I like is this still allows players to plan amongst each other, and still everybody has their turn, and it eliminates a lot of the nonsense of rolling dice at the very beginning, when we really should just let everybody take their turn in the first round, and whatever happens, whatever consequences, will take place, and then the worst consequences are always going to be the ones where you fall to 0 hit points, right? Whether it be the monster or the character, that's only going to happen at the end of the round because it's all happening very quickly. Just a suggestion. You do not need to agree with me. Twisted Tech Mike, the beauty of Fantasy Grounds, the combat tracker keeps up with initiative, reactions, concentration effects, etc. I know a lot of people will roll initiative before the session. Before they start playing the game, they'll roll initiative in advance. And certainly I do that sort of thing, but it still creates a problem for those people who want to, when you have 2 combats, unless you keep the same initiative the whole session, you still got to roll initiative again, unless of course you decide that you're going to have everybody roll like 5 different initiative scores, and then you're going to put them into order every time a new combat starts, which is still a lot of fiddling around the Dungeon Master has to do. Certainly it's a lot quicker, and you wouldn't have to ditch initiative completely, but is there anything wrong with just ditching initiative and just assuming that everybody's going to get to act in that round, and then we play up the worst consequences at the end? I don't honestly see that there is a problem myself. Scott, anyone remember weapon speed factors? Slowed combat, but it was pretty interesting. I'm sure it was pretty interesting, but I don't know that it's necessarily what people show up for when they want to play Dungeons and Dragons. Interesting mechanics don't really make the game. I know for some people it is the most important aspect for them, but I think ultimately Dungeons and Dragons is about fantasy, and the mechanics are just really there to help support the whole story and adventure. And I'm not just saying, when I say story, I don't mean a prefabricated novel or anything like that. We're talking about an adventure where you actually feel like you're taking part and everything's happening, right? And the better we can apply this process, and combat is usually the one where it really falls apart because of the very mechanical nature and rule-based nature of combat. Specifically, Dungeons and Dragons is not the only role-play system that deals with this sort of issue. But, and of course, the turn-based idea has always been there. But like I said, there's good ways of dealing with it to remove a lot of the complexity that didn't need to be there in the first place. Okay. Twisted Tech Mike, good point on Swift first. Yeah. People who move, get on with it and take their turn first should be rewarded, I honestly think. And it isn't actually taking away from anybody. Dolphus, turns get long at level 12, mostly my 2 fighters, yes, because they're rolling so many dice. They need like a big mug to roll all those dice for their attacks and specifically for their damage dice as well, because the amount of damage dice they often have is monstrous. But, it's just, 4, 5 attacks, and then of course if they use something like Action Surge, you're going to go through the whole process all over again. They'll wind up with like 10 attacks at high level. High level play really falls apart, and I know it used to be the most grating part for me was running high level play games and dealing with that sort of stuff. And then of course people who were casting spells who did not know what they were doing, and they needed time to plan and prepare, and it made much more sense to let somebody else take a turn. The Carter videos, don't worry about that. Okay, Daniel, yeah, I forgot I mentioned a 60-second time limit for everyone to figure out what to do, Yeah, I believe, now Daniel, you might have been the one who did the video on no initiative. I'm not sure if you're the one who made that video on YouTube. Is it Dungeon Craft? I think is that your channel, Daniel? Well, if 2 players do the same thing, then that's more realistic. Yeah, it is more realistic, but it's still a game, it's still a fantasy game, and we didn't go and play Dungeons and Dragons for being realistic. If we wanted it to be realistic, we'd just go and do it for real, right? If you really wanted to go and fight with swords, you'd just wander off into a field with a whole bunch of people with real swords and go at it. We're not looking for realistic. what we're looking for is for fun. And I feel like trying to make things more realistic in Dungeons and Dragons, it certainly might appeal to some people, but I don't think that's what players come to the table for. When people talk about realistic, I always find that it's the vast majority of dungeon masters who look at a game system and think this is better because it's more realistic. And we're playing a fantasy game called Dungeons and Dragons. And it's like, oh my gosh. But yeah, 60 seconds, it's still a time factor. I've seen players, when you bunch them up and you eliminate things that require dice rolling and so forth to figure out who's going to go first, when you do that sort of thing, people who are organized go fast. They really get on with it. No, it's not my channel, but I do watch it. Yes, okay, all right. And, he made a lot of really good points in that video, but I would like to go the next step and say that, there's a lot more we can do. We can get rid of initiative, and we can not worry about all the pre-planning and waiting for people to make decisions, because there's plenty of people who already know exactly what they want to do, and we don't need to wait for them. They're ready to go. So let's let them have their turn. Now, for those of you who are dungeon masters and thinking, well, this is bad because, what happens is if we take away the turn-based concept, we now have a situation where in the past, if we used traditional Dungeons and Dragons initiative, that a character or a monster could take down another character or monster before they got a chance to do anything in that round. Which means they would never be able to drop the monster or never be able to drop the character. And that part of the game is now lost. Is that really what we want to keep? Is that really what we want to keep in our Dungeons and Dragons game? That by having it turned into a turn-based system where we have to follow this order, and this order is going to dictate what's going to happen in that one round rather than have everything happen all at once. Is that what we want to hang on to and grasp onto? And personally, I don't think we should. I think we should just consider everything happens in the round, everybody takes their turn, those who are organised take their turn, get it out of the way, and then once that's done, we can tick off, okay, Bob's had their turn, Rose has had their turn, Jeff's had his turn, cool, right, there's only a couple of left to take their turn, and okay, there's a couple of people who are going to drop at the end of the round. And it's done. It's so much easier. What if multiple players are ready at the same time? Well, here's the thing. That's great. That means you can just say, okay, if there are multiple people ready at the same time, they're all going to get to take their turn anyway. And you just say, look, who's going to go first? And if there's an argument, say, okay, well, I'm going to take Jeff and Rose are ready. Okay, Jeff, you can go first, or Rose, you can go first. You just decide as a dungeon master. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. It doesn't create a problem whatsoever. You will find that players will be pretty quick about who they want to go first, particularly if there's sort of like a stalemate, because you've got 2 people or 3 people who want to go at the same time. It's happened to me. I've said, okay, you 3 players, you take your turn now. What are you going to do? And they'll all try to speak at once and say, okay, slow down. Okay, so you all want to do something. You've already got something. Who's going to go first? So since you're all ready. And they'll say, okay, Jeff's going to go first. All right, Jeff, what are you doing? Okay, roll your dice. Okay, next person, what are you doing? Okay, roll your dice. Next person, what are you doing? It's very, very easy to manage. And then as the numbers come in and they tell you what their rolls to attack, or whatever saving throw is required, or what their damage is, you just mark everything off. It really does make life a lot easier as far as I'm concerned. Okay, now I think this is probably a really good point to stop, but if there are questions that people want to ask about initiative and issues that you think I have not addressed and not talked about that would be better resolved and discussed here, let's do it now. If you have questions as a player or a dungeon master that are outside of initiative and not talking about initiative, that's fine. I will talk about those as well. Hi, Joe. But otherwise, I think this is a good place to stop since I don't see any more questions. Nobody's provided any more feedback or any more ideas. Okay, what do we got here? Kanoko. What about the spells that utilize the based effects and stuff? Okay, let's talk about spells and initiative then. Because I know what you're saying. You're saying, okay, what about things like a spell that drops in an area and affects an area? And I'm assuming that's what you're talking about. Kanoko, if that's not what you're saying, then you'll explain it to me. So, an area effect spell. So, I don't know, let's say John is next up. He casts Fireball, locates it here, where there are 5 orcs, and he's managed to lay it down to avoid hitting the players. He's taking his turn. But since everything is happening, right, that means that there's going to be other characters who are going to move into that area during the same round. And apparently everything's happening at the same time. So that means if they move through that area, then they get hit. But here's the thing. A round is 6 seconds. And a fireball spell is instantaneous, isn't it? So spells that are instantaneous just go off right then and there. It's a fraction of a second. Bam. Right then when John took his fireball blast, poof. Whatever's there when he takes his turn gets hit. Anybody who moves into that space during the round isn't going to need to make a saving throw. Now, spells that affect an area there's still going to be some turn-based aspect to it. So a spell that affects an area, when John does a spell, say it's a spell that continues on, like Evard's Black Tentacles, he'll lay it down, it'll stay there, and it will affect anybody who moves into that area. So anybody who takes a turn after John, once he's cast the spell, is going to be affected by the tentacles. But a spell that's instantaneous, that's easy to deal with. Very, very easy. It doesn't actually create any problems whatsoever. So even if you're dealing with area effect spells with a saving throw, it's still easy to navigate. You're not actually eliminating the turn-based aspect to Dungeons and Dragons. What you're eliminating is the initiative rolling process to Dungeons and Dragons, which is what often creates the biggest problem. Kanoko, all right, so I satisfied you with my answer. Good. So for those of you who feel like it can't be done, trust me. Give it a go. See how it works. See how your players respond and how they feel about the whole process. Now, there are a few features in Dungeons & Dragons that could be nerfed or diminished by using this system. And the feat alert, for example, could be affected by using this spell. Now, why? Because you get a +5 to your initiative when you're using initiative. And since suddenly we're not using initiative, what's the point in taking the alert feat? Well, I'll tell you why. Even without the +5 on alert, not being able to be surprised, which is what alert does, is one of the most impressive benefits a feat can have. Sorry, pardon me, I got a big gas. So I would not worry so much about that sort of thing. Okay, if you feel that they need to have some sort of additional benefit because they're losing the +5 on initiative because of the alert feat, then fine, find a way of dealing with that. But honestly, not being able to be surprised by picking up a feat is one of the most beneficial player options there are in the game. And that's only going to be a problem if you use feats in your game. I'm sure there's a few dungeon masters who don't use feats or do multi-classing in their game. Jonathan, hi Jonathan. How do you deal with the situations when players kill the monster before the other players get a turn? Well, Jonathan, I did actually discuss that. So here's the thing. We're going to treat what we're doing is it's one round. So everybody, no matter what, is going to take their turn in that one round. And anybody who drops to 0 hit points, whether that be a monster or an NPC or another creature or a beast or a player character, does not drop to 0 hit points till the round finishes. So that's how you deal with it. Okay? So yes, so how do you deal with a situation where players kill the monsters before the other players get a turn? Now this still, now that's all right, Jonathan, it's not a problem, okay? So there is still the possibility that if your encounter is set up in such a way that maybe you haven't put enough baddies in there, and your first round of combat finishes 3/4 of the way through. So somebody winds up in a situation where essentially they're doing stuff, and really, the 4 or 5 monsters you've got on the table have already been killed. They're already at 0 hit points. They're just waiting for the round to finish. Now, this could be on the first round. This could be on the second or third round, whatever round it is. And that means that somebody's not going to get to actually do anything, right? No, that doesn't mean that at all. What it means is, and you don't even have to tell them that the monster has fallen to 0 hit points. That can all be resolved and revealed at the end of combat, at the end of the round of combat. So that means that somebody who would normally not be able to do something and feel like they were participating in that round will still take an action, and the monster will take more than more hit points than it would take to get it down to 0 hit points. So it'll wind up going into negatives, which we don't do anymore anyway. Okay, but they don't know that. It doesn't matter. They still feel like they contributed to the destruction of those creatures. And in terms of your description, in terms of what happens to monsters, you can say, well, this monster is swaying. If you really feel like, if it's fallen to 0 hit points, and you want to be able to sort of describe that it's on its last legs, that those 2 orcs are swaying. They look like they're about to fall over any second. And that gives the players some sort of point of reference to understand who they might be better off to target. Okay? Rather than the monsters falling dead or going to 0 hit points as soon as the damage is taken. So there's another way of dealing with that issue. Okay? And you still, one of the things I always find frustrating is when you get through a round and then you wind up with a couple of players near the end of that round who don't get to actually do anything because somebody at the top of the initiative got to do something and they finished off the monster. I got the killing blow. It's mine. I'm the one who did it. There's always that satisfaction in killing that monster for a player, but it still allows people to all have a part to play. Remember, it's about the group. It's not about one individual. Okay, all right. So what else we got here? You don't have to worry about. People should never feel bad about being late to the live streams. Daniel. It could get quite chaotic, though, when all the players are racing to shout out there. So here's the thing. It doesn't get chaotic because I batch my players. I batch them into groups of 3. I can deal with 3 players at a time. And if everybody wants to take their turn at the same time, I just say, okay, stop. Who wants to go first out of the 3 of you, since you're all ready to go right now? Okay, good. They're going to take their turn. And if there's any arguments as a dungeon master, you decide. Because you've got 3 players, you just pick one. It's very easy to solve, so it doesn't get chaotic. I know people think that it's bad, but you think about when you're running combat and the amount of time you sit there waiting for players to make decisions, add up dice, roll dice, look up rolls. You have plenty of time. You can process all of that stuff in a very short space of time. You don't have to worry about that sort of stuff. Honestly, do not worry about it feeling like it's going to get chaotic. There's always an easy way to manage that. Now, the Purple Kitten of Death. What a fantastic name. I love it. I feel this system makes monsters more useful to the DM, but what is the issue we're trying to correct here? The issue is that initiative slows things down. It sort of breaks everything up, and it focuses so much on a whole lot of extra work for the dungeon master. Trust me, it is a lot less work to eliminate initiative and having players roll dice and then mark down those initiatives and then put it all into order and then go from there, and then have each person one at a time take a turn. Okay? That is actually more work than just ditching the old initiative system completely and going with something that's far more streamlined. Frank, hi Frank. Right, but if you have a character that essentially does overkill damage, it makes the impact of that player's turn irrelevant. No, it doesn't. It does not. it doesn't make it irrelevant at all, Frank. I would say that their overkill damage is not irrelevant. They don't know that it's overkill damage. Okay? So a player that does damage on a creature, if all 5 creatures are about to fall in that round, that's the situation we're really looking at, right? If they're all sitting on 0 hit points and all we're doing is waiting for the last person to take their turn, or the last creature to take their turn in the round before creatures start falling over because they're on 0 hit points, it doesn't diminish that at all. If anything, it just confirms it. Okay? I don't know why people think that it diminishes it, because you as the Dungeon Master know what's going on. What's even better about this is it means that a character who would normally have gone down in that round still gets to take their turn in that round. And at the end of the round, they'll fall unconscious, or the character will be dead, or whatever it is. So I don't feel that it makes it irrelevant at all, Frank. If anything, it just confirms things and allows everybody to take the turn that they were hoping to get. Okay. I'll get back to you, Frank. I can see your comment. Okay, Daniel. I play with up to 8 players. Yes. Now, Daniel, if you're playing with up to 8 players, guaranteed. I did a video called Group Initiative, and I really recommend checking that video out. And it explains how you can run initiative in like groups rather than one person at a time, because it will take a long time to get through combat with 8 people, each taking their turn, one person at a time in sequence. Okay, whereas you can do that by just bucketing them into groups, and that will help speed up the process. Jonathan, did you speak about Satine Phoenix, the way of initiative? What are your thoughts on with the index cards? Well, the index cards are just basically another way of speeding up the process. She has cards, so let's talk about that system, where she just has everybody's character name on it. She shuffles them up, and then that is the order in which the combat takes place, and she can do that every single turn. That generates, honestly, I feel like it generates less work than the traditional initiative system, granted. But it still means that people have to figure out what's going on, and we're still dealing with one person at a time. Whereas I still feel like Dungeon Masters are quite capable. I've seen them do it, I've done it, quite capable of doing people in batches. Because it means that if you get to Jeff, we're up to Jeff, and Jeff is like, okay, and I'm gonna, and you go through that process. When you have batches, you can deal with the people who are already organised and ready to go. Okay, and it gives them time to process what's going on. So I don't think it's a bad system. I think it's probably a system that Satine has used to sort of vary things up and change things around. And if you feel like that's something that you want to do, if you want to shuffle up the index cards every single time there's a combat, and then lay them out so people can see where they sit in the turn. But for me, I am looking at, let's eliminate initiative and eliminate the importance of who goes where in the turn, because that's really not important at all. And let's just play out the round and deal with the consequences at the end. Okay, Frank, let's get to your statement here. The logic of only applies if there is one monster. If there are multiple monsters, they did waste a turn because they could have focused damage elsewhere. Well, Frank, I did talk just briefly about how you can describe if a monster is on 0 hit points and somebody hasn't taken their turn yet, you can say that that monster looks like it's swaying. But if all the monsters are all sitting on 0 hit points, you can say that they all look like they're on their last legs. The players don't know that they're sitting on 0 hit points. All they know is they're close to death. Or they might be close to death. Okay? So I still don't think that it actually only applies logically to a single monster. Whether it be multiple monsters or not, okay? And as a Dungeon Master, you can direct people and say, look, that one's on its last legs. You don't necessarily, you could attack this one. This one looks a bit more healthy. You can drive the direction of where players put their attacks. And even if the player is unsure and makes a mistake, you as a Dungeon Master can, if they put their damage onto a creature that's only on 0 hit points and it hasn't fallen in the round yet, you can just switch that over to one that already has still hit points. I do that all the time. I often will take monsters, and when it comes to damage, and I use average damage for my monsters, I don't roll for damage. What I will do is, if somebody is making an attack and they do a stupendous amount of damage and it would kill a particular monster outright, then that's the one I will do. That's the one I'll take out, the one that will benefit them the most. Do you know what I mean? If there's a monster and they've done like, I don't know, 10 points of damage, and they target a creature that's only got 3 hit points, but if they had targeted a different monster that would have dropped because it's got 8 hit points, I'll do that. I know that's not something that necessarily Dungeon Masters like the idea. They feel like players need to be targeting. And I will explain to players, look, I've shifted the damage you did, because you did so much, onto a different creature because it had more hit points, and it still went down. And it was still a big advantage to you. And often my players, they get used to this because I explain this process to them, and they'll say, Fred, when you're applying the damage, I just want to make sure that the monster goes down rather than you apply it to one that's got lots of hit points. And I can do that as well. So we can shift things around. And it honestly, it does not create any extra work for you as a Dungeon Master. If anything, it will speed up the combat and push the monsters out of existence far quicker. Yes. Okay, so, all right, Frank, what do we got here? Right, but if a turn is happening in 6 seconds, how would they acquire this information while taking their action? Very, very simple. You describe it. Monsters fall into to 0 hit points. It's not going to fall over until the end of the round. And I describe Wally's character, or Bob the Barbarian, strikes it, and you can see that this orc is swaying. I've just described it. Now, the player might not know whether it's on 0 hit points, 1 hit point, 2 hit points, but I have just communicated that information. How long did it take me? It didn't take me very long at all. Like 2 seconds. Easy. Frank, when you run combat, is there a theatre of the mind or a grid? I use both. Frank, I use both. So if combat would be easier for me to lay out and manage with a grid and a battle grid and miniatures or tokens or pawns, I'll use that. If it's like 1 or 2 creatures and I know that I don't really feel like setting it up, I'll use theatre of the mind. I'm very, very... I pick my moments. There are just certain things that just don't need to be used. You don't need to use a map and grids for. You know, particularly if there's 1 creature. If there's 1 creature, do I need to really put it out? Do I need to really do that? I mean, I know this creature is probably going to go down in the first round because of the number of hit points it's got and the amount of damage my players can do. So this combat's like 1 round or 2 rounds. It doesn't really matter. So I use both. Cleave, yes. Okay, I think we've beaten this. I hope, Frank, have I answered your questions satisfactorily? Because I know you clearly have a lot of questions and are trying to think really hard about the potential issues that might come up, and therefore how they would interplay and work if you suddenly ditch your old initiative system. Okay, what do you got here? So if a monster isn't within 5 feet of another, how does that overkill damage apply to the nearest monster? Seems like a stretch of realism. You're playing Dungeons and Dragons, Frank. It's a fantasy game. Okay? Realism doesn't come into play. It doesn't even have to play. I treat my monsters like a pool of hit points. You know? It's really simple. You just treat them as a pool of hit points. And I've said this to players before. You know, when I'm applying damage to monsters, I'm doing it in such a way as, 1, to maximize the amount of damage you do to them, so that there's less of this, you know, you did 10 hit points of damage to a creature that only had 2 hit points, when it would have been better served on a different creature that was still had a lot more hit points. Then that's what I will do. So I'm not looking at realism, Frank. I'm looking at ease and speed of play and reducing the amount of headache for you as a dungeon master and other dungeon masters. Daniel, what about using an app that rolls initiative for you and sorts into order and tells whose turn it is? Well, you could. I mean, if you've got everybody's initiative modifier and you just press a button and it does it for you and then places it into order, well, you have essentially just computerized the system or mechanized the system. But here's the thing. If you start doing that, what was the point of doing that in the first place? The players aren't getting to roll their attack rolls, and why not just ditch that completely and just go around in a circle, one after the other? I hope I answered your questions, Frank, because you're asking some really good questions. I am not giving you a hard time. You have asked some really good questions, and therefore I've tried really hard to answer them as honestly and clearly as I can. Okay. Okay, Daniel. No, here we go. Chugawat. I think that's Chugawat. Hi, Fred. Thanks for all of your Lost Mine of Phandelver content, new DM, and finding your content very useful. I'm really, really happy to hear that it's been useful to you. The good news is I think it's only one video left. I believe it's Glass Staff. And it will come out hopefully pretty shortly. I'm still working my way through it. Okay, Frank, what do you got here? Not taking it personally. Good. I appreciate your feedback. I appreciate your questions, Frank, because they are really good questions. They are sorts of things that I do, and sometimes I don't realize that I need to spell those sorts of things out. Do you know what I mean? Because when you take away initiative, you're taking away something that's so embedded into Dungeons and Dragons now, it's very hard to dissect it. Yeah. Daniel, going around in a circle would get very predictable. Yeah, it can, but it doesn't get predictable, because what you'll find is the order of and who goes first, you can change. Like I said before, you can change. You can go clockwise, you can go anti-clockwise. You're bunching people. So what's going to happen is that some players on round 1 are going to be organised, and they're probably going to take their turn first. And other people in round 2 might be not quite so organised this time round, and they'll wind up going after somebody else. So the initiative doesn't stay the same. There's nothing predictable about it. If anything, what is driving who takes their turn when is the players. I mean, ultimately, what we're looking at is the only thing we need to really concern ourselves with is that if we've got one lot of monsters, what players are going before that monster, or those collection of monsters, and then what players are going after the Dungeon Master has used their monsters. And that's it. There's really only 3 collections of groups. And if the Dungeon Master winds up going first or last, there's only 2 collection of groups. Do you know what I mean? So it isn't actually predictable at all. And you know, the great thing about it is it allows the players to do a bit of planning, and they will figure out how to work with it fairly quickly. I've seen it work. Yeah, it doesn't matter. It honestly doesn't matter. Why would it matter? Remember, everything's supposedly supposed to be happening all at the same time in that 6 seconds anyway. So it doesn't really matter. Everybody just take their turn, and really all we're trying to manage is the speed at which players present their turn. Do you know what I mean? That's all we're trying to do. As long as our players present their turn and take their turn as quickly as possible, it's all done. And we just get through it as quickly as we can. You know what happens is you wind up with more combats in your game session rather than less. It also gives you more time for role play, more exploration time, instead of taking half an hour or an hour to run through a combat, when you've only got, between 2 and 4 hours to play. Zycam. Unfortunately, it's up to the DM to play the game the way they want it and the way their players enjoy it. Yes, it is. This idea will be good for some groups and not others. Yes, it will. That's right. It's just another creative alternative. Exactly. And I can guarantee you there will be players who will rebel and will hate this. They'll hate the idea of eliminating the old initiative system. And there will be dungeon masters who will not be able to get their head around it. And that's fine. But I put it out there, and like I do with a lot of different things, and you use it if you think you can. I would always recommend you try everything at least twice before you ditch it. Try everything twice before you ditch it. Okay, I think it's time to go. It's been an hour and my voice is almost gone. Hey, thank you for all of the really good questions, and for people who showed up and watched the live stream. It generated a lot of really good discussion, and I'm really happy about that. That's excellent. So, wherever you are in the world, whether it be the morning, afternoon, night, early morning, look after your family and your friends and yourself. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s. Just not for initiative.